Hello friends, my name is Igor Gavryshchak, traditional YouTube platform channel 24, live, today October 19th. Please be active, click likes, subscribe, comment, write questions. Constructive, adequate, relevant questions included in our stream, conversation shared, YouTube algorithms work. If do things, more people watch conversation, understand happening in your country partners, and of course, enemies.
Більша кількість людей зможе переглянути нашу розмову, зрозуміти, що відбувається на дану хвилину в Україні, в стані наших партнерів, ну і, звісно, наших ворогів.
I am pleased to welcome our guest, a political scientist, Dmytro Levis. Congratulations, glory to the heroes. About the meeting of Joe Biden and the G4 in Berlin yesterday, October 18th. Why wasn't Ukraine there? Why were they talking about Ukraine without Ukraine? We should mention the Kazan BRICS summit, scheduled for October 22nd to 24th. But the most interesting news is the most important news, and the most talked about among Ukrainians, about nuclear weapons. 2 days ago, the German newspaper Bild, their analyst who covers the fighting in Ukraine, Robke, wrote that he had allegedly spoken to some unnamed source in the president's office, and that Ukraine could produce its own nuclear weapons in a few weeks. Of course, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry and Volodymyr Zelenskyy denied this information, but dictator Putin commented on this in his communication with the media of the BRICS countries. Mr. Dmytro, to what extent did this information really scare Putin, or is it a specially thought-out hoax on the part of the Kremlin? What do you think about it? Let me remind you that we should not rule out the possibility that this outpouring was initiated by the Kremlin. We cannot. Moreover, we have seen this repeatedly appear in foreign media. We have seen how Mr. Robke himself, by the way, regularly makes such ambiguous statements which are supposedly pro-Ukrainian, but on the other hand, for some reason, they work for the Russian Federation.
Нібито і проукраїнські, а з іншого боку, навпаки, вони чомусь так працюють для Російської Федерації. Таке теж.
But I think that in fact, well, the topic is really alive because you can just remember that, right, on these very days. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, he said why, by the way, this article in Bild, and it also started a separate life. Because the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, he talked about what he said.
Так почала окреме життя, бо президент України Володимир Зеленський, він говорив про те, що розказував про
and explained that Ukraine had once given up nuclear weapons, but did not receive real security guarantees. And it turned out that everything in the world looks like this. Either you have nuclear weapons, or the only thing that can protect you is participation in an alliance, and there is only one such alliance, NATO.
Або єдиний момент, який тебе може захистити, це участь в альянсі. Альянс такий є один – НАТО. І Україна обирає...
And Ukraine is choosing NATO. So the topic was actually raised. And here, as this publication appeared on purpose, there was a specific response from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And no matter how one interprets it, Volodymyr Zelenskyy's words were specific. In that regard, they were unambiguous.
Як би там, хто б там їх не тлумачив, але слова Володимира Зеленського, вони були конкретними саме в тому плані, було однозначно зазначено, що
that Ukraine is choosing NATO. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs also wrote very specifically that this echoes Russian narratives, reminding us that it is the Russian Federation that blackmails the world with a nuclear threat. This is also true, and sometimes the world just turns a blind eye to it, that the Russian Federation is blackmailing the world with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And Russia is distorting it, saying that Ukraine is attacking it when the fighting in the Kursk region started. Ukraine launched an offensive. They started talking about how Ukraine was preparing to strike the Kursk nuclear power plant. So Russia is always playing in its repertoire, being a criminal, being the perpetrator of all these crimes and threats.
Винуватцем всіх цих злочинів і погроз,
It blames its victim. I mean, this is what happened. And I think it's actually good that the topic has come up in this case.
Гадаю, що насправді це добре, що ця тема
Because to pay attention to what Russia says, because they have been accusing us of creating a dirty bomb since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. And these things that I talked about there, about the Kursk Sea, about Zaporizhia, although they just have to get out of there, and that's it, and all the problems are over.
Звідти вони просто мають забратися і все, і всі проблеми закінчилися. І саме росіяни, до речі, своїми ракетами без...
And it was the Russians, by the way, who repeatedly fired their missiles in the immediate vicinity of the southern Ukrainian nuclear power plant in Netyshin. That is, all this happened, and they seized the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And this list of their crimes in the nuclear sphere is already quite extensive, so the topic looks a little different here. And it looks like a provocation, and it looks like Russia was really interested in this. But we have to use this to our advantage, because in any case, Ukraine is really one of the very few examples of a country that actually complies with international law.
Україна дійсно є одним із дуже небагатьох прикладів країни, яка дійсно дотримується міжнародного права.
Zelensky's formula for peace is what? Is it an attempt to form not only to end the war, but to form an agenda after the war on the basis of the law that now exists in the world? And that is why we are also talking about punishing the Russian Federation. Our partners often talk a lot about that yes, Russia, by the way, is now just a classic example, in my opinion, is this. Now, the Slovak Prime Minister, although not a leading country, is a great example. He says that Russia has committed aggression, it is guilty, we are waiting for Ukraine in the European Union, but we cannot accept Ukraine in NATO. And again, we need to solve everything with the Russian Federation in peace. That is, even when there is agreement. That Russia has committed a crime. It is not a question of violating the law. It must be punished for that. Yes, this is a very telling moment. And here in this context, when Ukraine offers a victory plan in the person of Zelenskyy, which, by the way, I think is absolutely realistic. In fact, yes, there is no unrealistic point. The first point about inviting NATO, it did not arise at all. If there had been an invitation when it was absolutely appropriate last year at the summit in Vilnius, where there was a large group of supporters of Ukraine, and this factor had no influence on the American elections. It was already something that happened. Again, it is this invitation that demonstrates to Russia well, it demonstrates to Russia that Ukraine has already abandoned it, that it removes Russian demands, including those about letting NATO go back to the borders of 97, because this is not a reaction in response, but an active position. And in this context, to remind them of what Ukraine has abandoned and what Ukraine has to.
І ось в цьому контексті нагадувати, від чого відмовилась Україна, і в тому, що Україна має, там певним...
In a way, we don't talk about this. There is a certain hint here, just by itself, that Ukraine has such opportunities, but still remains faithful to the international law it has chosen, does not withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, does not create nuclear weapons, but remains faithful to this path of Euro-Atlantic integration into NATO, into the alliance. This is the moment that we have to use in this particular case from this scandal. I wouldn't even say scandal, but from this active wave of information that has appeared. Speaking of yesterday's meeting, Joe Biden, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, and German President and Chancellor Olaf Scholz, they talked not only about Ukraine, but of course they mostly talked about Ukraine. And by the way, their statements after the conversation primarily concerned Ukraine. Why was Volodymyr Zelenskyy not there? Why wasn't he invited? Why talk about Ukraine without Ukraine?
Що це зустріч не лише заради України, але українське питання було хедлайнером цієї зустрічі. Чому не запросили? Чому про Україну без України?
I think that this is actually a mistake on the part of the United States. Why? Because Joseph Biden had the opportunity to leave his political will for the whole world. And so, in principle, this announcement of Ukraine's invitation to NATO, which could have been made at the Renstein conference, was made at first. Okay, let's believe that it is difficult to go in the face of difficult elections. You can't use it against you later, because if you go to Ramstein in a natural disaster, your competitors will use it against you. We can believe that to a certain extent.
Не поїхати на Рамштайн, бо інакше це конкуренти використають проти тебе, можемо в це повірити певним чином. Але і після цього ось
But after this meeting, which was really made to leave this political will and to continue contact for his successor, it is clear that Biden does not expect Kamala Harris to win, and it was wrong not to invite Ukraine to the meeting.
Для свого наступника зрозуміло вже, що Байден не розраховує на те, що Камала Гарріс переможе. Це і було невірним, не запросити туди зустріч України.
Although he has talked about it, he hasn't made any decisions by and large. I think there are many reasons for this, including, in general, the way Joseph Biden looks at it.
Я думаю, що тут багато причин. Тут причини в тому числі і взагалі в тому, як дивиться на Джозеф Байден, тобто ось цей побоювання.
This fear of an escalation that might happen and other things like that, the traditionalism in politics, I think that's what it was. And to say that it's about Ukraine without Ukraine, no one can forbid you to talk about it anyway. In fact, there are a lot of other problems here.
Ніхто ж все рівно не може заборонити про це говорити. Тут інша річ, що насправді є і інших проблем.
And most of them appeared, among other things, because of the unclear or slowed down position on assistance and support for Ukraine during the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Here, but it is clear that we are also talking about the Asia-Pacific region, where the People's Republic of China's activity against Taiwan, where North Korea threatens South Korea, South Korea and Japan, where it suddenly appeared that North Korea has become a driver of international politics, because Biden is already inviting China, Russia, and North Korea to nuclear disarmament talks. And why this happened is because Russia got into a rather difficult situation and destroyed that system. And generally building such a position on North Korea. It is a very rare case, by the way, in history when this was done with the help of the UN Security Council. North Korea felt that it could be such a factor, even though it depends on and is guided by Beijing.
Відчула себе, те, що вона може бути таким чинником, хоча вона і залежить від Пекіна, і орієнтується тут на ньому.
So these things were also discussed, and I think, this is another very telling point in this context, that there is still no understanding that the key is really in Ukraine. So yes, they can talk about Ukraine without Ukraine.
Так, це про Україну без України вони можуть говорити.
Our partners probably do this regularly, but when they start talking about Ukraine without Ukraine with Russia, or with Russia and the People's Republic of China, this is really threatening. But we have to be aware that our position here must be unequivocal. Mr. Dmytro, actually after the meeting on Friday in Berlin on October 18th, Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, Joe Biden, and Schultz said that we will be with Ukraine as long as it takes. This is a disturbing phrase, or rather an incomprehensible thesis. What does it mean as long as it takes? And when will it not be necessary? It does not say that it will not be necessary when Ukraine wins. Many experts and analysts always say that we will talk to Ukraine correctly until we win, not as long as it takes. This is the first thing. And second, yesterday's conversation of Volodymyr Zelenskyy in a telethon with the national media, where he hinted that the West and our partners are not saying what they really want in this war. Because, as I recall, David Lammy and Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and his British counterpart, the British Foreign Secretary, came to Kyiv in early September, ostensibly with a message to hear how Kyiv, Zelensky, the president's office, and the military and political leadership of Ukraine see the war ending. Our partners, our key partners, we don't know this, and we have never heard it. And you know why we haven't heard it? Because everyone has a different view. And this is why it really shows what image we have. We have a lot of discussions about the image of victory, what it should look like. And this is true and this is logical, but there are things that are basic. Yes, that is, this is something that cannot... That is, there can be no trade in Ukrainian sovereignty and territories. This is one such point. And the second point is justice. Russia must be punished for the crime of aggression that it started. This is a very telling moment here. Ukraine is much more mature than many of our partners. Because as it turned out, we are well aware of what international law is, what the UN Charter is, which provides for territorial integrity and inviolability of borders, what the Helsinki Accords are, which speak of inviolability of borders in Europe, and that we are now defending this system of law, including, by the way, with the operation in the Kursk region.
Зараз захищаємо ось цю систему права, в тому числі, до речі, і операцію в Курській області.
As Timothy Snyder, an American historian who knows Ukraine very well, rightly said about what happened, there are many reasons why. For example, I think it's because of nuclear weapons by and large. Russia is perceived to be able to strike any object with missiles, but it cannot be attacked.
Росія сприймається так, що ось коли вона може завдавати ударів ракет по будь-яких об'єктах, то по ній не можна завдавати.
The war is being waged on the territory of Ukraine, which was invaded by the Russian Federation. And this is somehow perceived unambiguously in the world, so that there is no escalation, no similar actions can be taken on the territory of Russia. Although this is so contrary to common sense, law, justice, and humanism.
Настільки суперечить от взагалі, так, і здоровому глузду, і праву, і справедливості, гуманізму, що
that this should probably be visible to the naked eye, but it's not. And the operation in the Kursk region demonstrates this. The strikes on the territory of the Russian Federation that Ukraine is carrying out also bring back into force international law and the fact that there can be no exceptions if a country is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. And it has a huge nuclear arsenal. They say they can have more. And in fact, it happens like this. But it is Ukraine that is bringing this back through its actions. And that is why, by the way, it is also necessary not only to achieve justice, but this justice is absolutely within the framework of international law. And the formula for peace is also based on this law. And the plan for victory is also, by the way, even the very first point. On invitations, it is also about the right, that is, no one can restrict for any reason where Ukraine can join. And likewise, the Russian Federation has no such right. We are just returning this system of law, which is what is really happening, in my opinion. Mr. Dmytro, if we look back at the history of Ukraine's attempts to get at least an invitation to join the alliance, we remember the end of 2010-2009 when Ukraine wanted to get the right to be part of the alliance. It hasn't. Why should it get it now? Frankly speaking, all the steps, all the decisions of our partners, for some reason, do not indicate to me that they have the political will to grant us at least membership, because it has been repeatedly discussed and examples have been given that there are countries at war that became NATO members. There are many examples. NATO members in conflict, think of Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus. So, it's a matter of political will. Well, yes, definitely. By the way, when now, here in Ukraine, we have already begun to hear this. Well, we often like to say that everyone in the West is smart and correct and everything is somehow wrong, and that Ukraine itself is visible here. We are here the day before yesterday. The day before yesterday, or the day before that, one of the American spokesmen, probably Sullivan, said that when Ukraine is ready, we will accept it. But we need reforms, and everyone is grabbing onto that. It's really a small-mindedness to seize on this. You see, they say we don't carry out reforms, we don't have democracy. This is a real lie, for sure, because there are a lot of examples of this. I can give you many examples of countries in different states of accession. And nowadays, and for example, there is a complete loss of common sense, such as the Hungarian Foreign Minister Szijjártó, who says that there is nothing to do in Ukraine, and that the war is our fault, and that the war with Russia would not have started at all if we had listened to Russian demands. If you listen to Russia's demands, let's initiate a withdrawal from NATO in Hungary. That's one of their demands. Which he doesn't really mention. That NATO should get out of the way in 1997. Yes, it's a political issue, absolutely political will. And in response, by the way, I have to say that it is present in many countries because the group of support for Ukraine is powerful. It's systemic. It's so consistent. That's also true. And there are countries that will just listen anyway, even Hungary and Slovakia who are talking about something now, and Turkey if there is a political decision by the leading countries, namely the United States and Germany, but everything really rests on the fact that we are at war with the Russian Federation. And this is the extent to which this image of the Russian Federation is hovering, hanging everywhere in the minds of European and American politicians, not all of them, but so many, that it creates this eternal, endless discussion. This is why.
таких так стільком кількості, що це створює ось цю дискусію вічну, да, безкінечну.
Because there is a perception of the still mythologized Russia, oh, it's a threat, because there is a desire to return to normal cooperation with Russia, and because in economic terms, there are again positions of influence of Russia, informal or outright criminal, which have been formed over decades, not in Putin's 20 years of power.
Це все формувалося десятиліттями. Це сформувалося не за 20 років Путіна, там чи скільки, 25 от зараз буде, да?
This was formed for decades in Soviet times. Again, there is a reluctance to look at Russia as a violator, because there were glasses through which one looked at this Russian, through its great Russian culture. And Bucha once broke these glasses, and it was painful, so unpleasant. Why did they break these glasses? For Ukrainians. We were looking at them all the time. They were so pink. It was so beautiful. You took them and broke them down. What to do? And that's why other things come up. There are good Russians there. They took these glasses, tinkered with them a bit, glued them together or did something else, and fixed the optics. They hand them over and say, we fixed the optics, there is no Putin here, and that's why you have that rosy look again. And that's it. And indeed, it doesn't hurt us to look at Russia anymore. We look at it as something good. Such Ukrainians are a nuisance. They ask how so? Why so? This decision is influenced by these Russian perceptions. On the one hand, by the absolutely irrational fear of these nuclear weapons, which is not justified. And why? Because Ukraine has already demonstrated that Russia can be beaten and is beaten, and it is not as strong as it could be, and Kyiv has not done this in 3 days, to put it mildly. And now it needs help from North Korea and Iran, which they themselves have always laughed at. And this perception of how can it be that there is a benefit here, and resentment for the usual view of the world. Why? Because why be offended by yourself? Not, of course, at the one who opened their eyes to the truth. This human psychology is the same all over the world, but that doesn't mean that this view is the only one and that it can't be broken. I think that everything in the discussion is possible. And again, the Russian Federation itself is doing a lot to correct this bright image of itself, and its statements and aggression against NATO countries will do a lot to do this. What will he do for this, Mr. Dmitry? And the actual topic of our conversation is that Putin was afraid to go to Brazil. Again, in a conversation with the media, he said that I don't want to go because I will be the main topic of the G20. And the G20 is not going to be for that. We will send someone else, as far as I understood, which is a very flaccid excuse for such a great dictator. But definitely listen. Well, this... He also said that we are an international criminal court. Not all countries are authoritative. And in general, he just forgot that they used to do things differently. Yes, for some reason he was an authority. Yes, well, he's not used to it. I mean, he regularly says at the beginning of his career, he said that only an idiot would want to annex Crimea to Russia. There are no problems. There is nothing. Yes, well, he is a master of his word. He gave his word. And he signed agreements with Ukraine. By the way, this is a very specific case. He was not afraid to fly to Mongolia, and Mongolia also signed the Roman Statute. But it's one thing to fly to Mongolia, which is sandwiched between the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. And because of this, it has a very peculiar view of the world, to put it mildly. Although, by the way, this is the first time for Mongolia that such fundamental things are missed, and the whole world considers Mongolia a democratic country. But when such seemingly not so fundamental things start happening, we may not arrest Putin or do something like that. It means that this democracy is worth a lot, because it may not exist in this way anymore. Either we should have just not accepted him, which was the only way out, or we should have just not agreed to the visit. And here, yes, this is really the second moment flying halfway around the world, and who knows how it will end, and how it is really scary, really dangerous. And you know, there was another quite revealing moment when he was talking about that we have a good relationship with the People's Republic of China. We have an equal partnership. We are here together with China. And the United States will not be able to stop the People's Republic of China from growing. So these moments are about the same. And here he pretended to be like that, but unsuccessfully, by the way, that he is not afraid to fly. He just said, "Why? There is so much attention around me. So boyish." And then there's this second point, which is also very boyish, but, well, who cares about my friend and me, as in that childhood joke? We are equal partners here with China. But then immediately start telling us how no one can do anything to China. In other words, they are actually aware of their role, which is absolutely secondary in this duo. Yes, Mr. Dmitry. And of course, on October 20th, 24th in Kazan, where, by the way, we asked the locals not to drive cars on the streets because they are too old. And, God forbid, representatives of other countries will see what a wooden age Russia lives in. In fact, they banned us. That is, they asked us not to drive our cars in Kazan into the streets if we needed to. South Africa, Brazil, India, China, and other countries will gather there, a hodgepodge that has been assembled over a long period of time. Putin will generally propose to make some kind of intercentral bank agreements to displace the dollar. In this world to pay with some kind of tokens. But as far as I understand it, it's like poultices for the dead, sorry. Because in terms of demographics, I mean, population, these countries are hegemonic, India, China, Russia. But in general, can they displace the dollar and the euro? What they want to do now is their main function, which they want to realize at this meeting. They are really only Russians, because everyone else has completely different goals. And by the way, you said it very well when you characterized the hodgepodge. So far, this alliance is here, and there are other views, including in Ukraine, that a global island is being formed here, and this global island is BRICS. It can somehow change the situation. In fact, I think it is too early to talk about this. I think it will probably never happen. Rather, even in the current situation, to introduce an alternative to the SWIFT, as Putin is talking about, to push the dollar system somewhere else. Even here, we have already seen that the People's Republic of China is not too happy. By the way, we see that, for example, a country that is oriented towards the People's Republic of China, such as Kazakhstan, will not be there either. Again, interesting things are happening here. In general, it's not just Russia, but there are really very different countries. And even India and the People's Republic of China are those countries. Who are by no means partners, that is, they are competitors. While they are all here, is one thing. The second thing is that all the practically leading countries that are going to be in BRICS have their own views on this. The People's Republic of China is definitely promoting its leadership in the world and in the global south, because the People's Republic of China really wants to be considered the spokesperson for this voice of the global south. Russia, of course, wants to use the resource in this way to fight the West, the United States, and NATO, so to speak, to push them aside. And against this background, Russia is trying to get as many members as possible, including these statements about Syria going there, Serbia. But we also have to take into account that Serbia is a very large country. Yes, it's nice for Russia to realize that it is going there, but in reality it is, so to speak, maneuvering against the backdrop of European integration, that is, bargaining, saying, don't be more lenient with us on the path of European integration, and we can do something with the BRICS here. So that's how it looks, I think. I believe that these Russian calculations in this context are really such projections that are unlikely to be realized and implemented, and we will see how other partners will act in this regard. Mr. Dmytro, thank you for this conversation. I would like to remind our viewers that we have a political scientist and expert at the United Ukraine think tank, Dmytro Livus, with us, so please, as usual, give him a like. Subscribe, comment, and of course, share our conversation. My name is Ihor Havryshak, and we will traditionally see each other on Channel 24.